Ladies and gentlemen and others, welcome back to my channel. I'm so happy to metaphorically see you here again. You know, there's a lot of talk about superhero fatigue, but all of that's just bullshit. When people say that, either they've got an agenda or maybe they're just watching the wrong stuff. So come along for the ride. I want to tell you all about the series that proves that superhero fatigue is just something that was made up. The beating heart of what makes Invincible the series exceptional is the relationship between Mark and Nolan, father and son, Omni-Man and... Before we go any further, I should give a couple of warnings. Firstly, obviously spoilers are unavoidable in this case, so if you haven't seen the TV series, maybe watch it first and then come back here again. Secondly, Invincible is one of the most violent and bloody comic books ever, and the TV series makes it even more visceral and gory. There's a hell of a lot of blood, violence and gore, but if that's not your cup of tea, then I understand. However, you would seriously be missing out if you don't watch this TV show. Before I jump into telling you why Invincible is so great, let me quickly tell you what the story is all about. So Invincible is about a world where people have superpowers. One of the strongest heroes of the world is Omni-Man, is kind of an analog for Superman. Just like Superman, he's also an alien from another planet, but unlike Superman, his planet still exists and it's filled with people with exactly the same kind of powers as what he has. Omni-Man's been on Earth for about 20 years doing the heroic thing, saving the world from all kinds of disasters. He's not the hero of our story though, his son is. 20 years before the events in Invincible, Omni-Man saved Invincible's mom from some kind of disaster. The two of them hit it off and they got married, and one thing led to another, and eventually Mark was born. In order to have the semblance of a normal life, Omni-Man created the identity of Nolan Grayson. When we join the story, it's the same week when Mark finally gets his superpowers. So on the surface, what you could call this is a coming-of-age kind of story. It quickly takes a turn away from that though. Invincible was first published in 2003, so the TV series follows on exactly 20 years later. It absolutely does my head in to think that this comic book came out 20 years ago. I'm not saying that I was a young man back then, but at least I had a lot more pep in my step in those days.
I'm now so old that my pussy is haunted.
The comic was created by the writer Robert Kirkman, and the distinctive art style it features is thanks to Cory Walker. Eventually, Cory Walker would be replaced by Ryan Ottley, who arguably elevated the art style to an even higher level. The late 90s and early 2000s were filled with grim and gritty deconstruction takes on superheroes, but the way the heroes are portrayed and treated in Invincible is one of the factors that makes it stand out in comparison to, for instance, something like The Boys. This is probably due to each writer's aims for the characters and for the world. In Watchmen, Alan Moore explored what makes a hero and how the world can influence these heroes, whereas somebody like Garth Ennis really despised superhero comics and was just looking to take a mean-spirited shit over the whole concept of superheroes in comics in general. The difference is Robert Kirkman and Alan Moore are people who love comic books and they love the heroes that used to be in the old pulp magazines. Robert Kirkman especially seems to have a real belief in the triumph of the human spirit, and this is reflected in the plot and the characters in the world of Invincible. The plot itself is fascinating. It's in equal parts a superhero coming-of-age story and also an exploration of life and love. In fact, the emotions the lead characters feel for one another and their world is pivotal to the plot. The comic itself was well written and excellently illustrated, but the animated TV series so far has been able to do a deeper characterization of all the characters as well as expanding a lot on the world, and has also been able to tighten up the plot quite a lot. The best decision that the comic creators and the TV series creators made though was to make it an animated TV series instead of attempting to make it a live action series. This is one of the major strengths of the animated TV series. It's like the comic book, just better. Season 1 of the TV series covered Volume 1 of the comic book series, and in condensing that much content, that means that the TV series feels a lot more streamlined. The comic book over time also developed its own humor around the art of comic books itself, a kind of meta-commentary on how comic books are done and what superheroes are all about. And while that's something that would definitely work within the comic book itself, it might not necessarily translate into an animated form. The animated series also has the benefit of hindsight. Many online forums exist that have extensively discussed every aspect of the plot and the characters over the past 20 years. So any old plot issues have been acknowledged, considered and improved upon for the TV series. One example of adaptation improving on the source is the fact that we get to see Omni-Man battle the Guardians of the Globe. In the comic book, we only saw the aftermath of the fight. But we'll talk about that later when you know who the Guardians of the Globe actually are. In a recent interview, Robert Kirkman said that the team behind Invincible is very aware of how ridiculous superhero stories actually are, but this is why they fully lean into it, unlike other movies that almost seem ashamed of the source material. It's possible that this is the reason why so many people actually connect with the TV series as well. However, on the flip side, it also means that you get goofy shit like the heroes all lining up to do superhero team-up poses, which in live action would look utterly ridiculous, but here it works. There's also a lot of archetypes or stereotypes used from comic books. So one could look at Omni-Man as being a Superman archetype, Darkwing being a Batman clone, and Warrior Woman being a Wonder Woman analog. In a similar vein, the world is also populated with superhero teams, similar to the Avengers or the Justice League. Using archetypes in storytelling is also something we see in The Boys, with each member of the Seven being an alternate to the Justice League characters or Avengers characters. This doesn't mean that you need a long and extensive background in comic books or superheroes to be familiar with the tropes. Whether you like it or not, you've already been exposed to never-ending steaming piles of content over the past decade. So much so that you recognize it when you see it.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
And once you have the stench of it in your nostrils, you'll recognize it quite easily. But unlike a lot of the outpourings from Marvel and DC, Invincible is actually good shit. The use of archetypes and stereotypes for heroes and villains as a kind of a shorthand allows the reader to get into the story a lot quicker. After all, what kind of superpowers are generally shown in comic books anyway, and why not use our general knowledge of existing characters and powers so that we can focus on the characterization and the plot instead? So, with all of that said, let's jump into it and let's have a look at some of these stereotypes. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was a silly, goofy team-up pose that the characters do within the story, but it actually gives us a perfect opportunity to just figure out who all of these characters actually are. In episode 1, we meet the Guardians of the Globe in the most dramatic possible fashion, saving the White House. This action sequence is perfect to show us how they function as a team, as well as showing us what their actual powers are. The leader of the team is a superpowered individual called the Immortal. His origin seems to be that he magically got his powers and he's been alive for thousands of years. It's also hinted at that in this world he was the Abraham Lincoln of the world. So for all intents and purposes, he actually fulfills the function of being Superman on the team. Then you have an unpowered superhero called Darkwing, who uses technology and gadgets same as Batman does. The third part of this superhero trinity is War Woman, an Amazon-like Wonder Woman stand-in. Then you have the ruler of Atlantis, Aquarius in this case, Red Rush, a guy who runs really fast, and lastly a shapeshifter from Mars called the Martian Man, whose name literally stops just short of being able to be sued by DC Comics. Another reason why it's a really smart idea to introduce us to the Guardians in the middle of a fight is so that we can see what their power level actually is. This shows us that they're not going to be a pushover if anybody tries to take them on. And there is another superhero team that's really important to the storyline called Teen Team. And this team consists of Robot, Atom Eve, Rexplode, and Duplicate. Now let me just take a minute here to say how much I love the names within this show because it gives you an idea of what exactly the characters' powers are. Robot is a machine man and the leader of the team. Atom Eve has the ability to change genetic structure of things at an atomic level. Rexplode has the ability to charge items with power and then make them explode. And Duplicate has the ability to turn into multiple versions of herself. There's a hell of a lot to unpack about this TV series, but if there's one good place to start, it might be with how good the characters actually are within Invincible's world. Omni-Man is the reason why Invincible is one of Earth's greatest heroes. As the son of Earth's mightiest hero and knowing from a very young age that eventually he would gain superpowers, Mark Grayson, Invincible, has been preparing all his life to live up to the legacy of Omni-Man. Unlike other heroes, Mark doesn't need to be told that with great power comes great responsibility, yada yada yada. He believes it, even with no power, that he has a responsibility to do the right thing and to oppose any injustice wherever he sees it, no matter what the personal cost might be. And he does believe this because that's the example that his father sets for him. As far as Mark knows, this is the central core of what Omni-Man is all about, putting others before himself, saving the world because he can. Mark's love for his father is one of the greatest drivers for who he will become. Having the literal perfect dad who daily risks his life to save the planet would have a profound effect on anyone's worldview. If inheriting that person's genetics also means gaining superpowers, a certain level of gratitude and hero worship would also be a cornerstone of their relationship. I mean, it makes sense. If your father's the greatest hero on Earth, then this is what you measure yourself against. whether you have powers or not. Ultimately, Mark will find out that the shining example of Nolan and Omni-Man is a facade, a mirage, a purposeful construct to achieve an agenda. This will recontextualize every single interaction and experience that he's had with his dad. The character of Nolan and Omni-Man is a study in nature versus nurture. Omni-Man took on the disguise and the identity of Nolan Grayson so that he could hide himself from humanity by pretending to be one of them. This is nothing but a paper-thin disguise, a pretense at being human. His true identity is that of a loyal Viltrumite. Viltrumites despise weakness. They literally purge all the weak on their planet. This took them hundreds of years, but finally they were left with only the strongest in their society. To a Viltrumite, all Earthlings are seen as weak, even those that have superpowers. But this weakness is not just physically, but also lacking the resolve to do what is needed to create a perfect society, such as, for instance, killing millions of their own citizens. The conflict in nature and nurture in Omni-Man comes from the fact that despite only being on Earth for a relatively short time, he has been influenced and softened by his time here. In the series, we see a couple of times that almost unwillingly that he has come to appreciate the beauty of the planet and that he has come to love his son. This appreciation of beauty and this love for his son definitely would be seen as weakness in Viltrumite society. To a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and for a Viltrumite that's been trained at war only, every problem can be solved by beating it into the ground. However, even the hardest hammer can be eroded over time, and being unconditionally loved, respected and admired by Mark to some extent has eroded away the hard edges of the uncompromising worldview of a Viltrumite to reveal the semblance of what could actually be a really good dad. Make no mistake about it, as a Viltrumite, Omni-Man believes to some extent he is owed a certain level of reverence and God worship. So to some extent he would believe that this level of hero worship, not only from his son but from the entire planet, is actually his due. And to some extent it also explains the level of anger he feels when he no longer has that coming from Mark. So even when brutally teaching Mark his place in the greater scheme of things, it's more from the perspective of a frustrated and disappointed father rather than a dispassionate warrior. Omni-Man and his disguise as Nolan has done such a great job at fooling the world that the suspicion that he might be other than he seems is met with utter disbelief by most people. This is reiterated to us over and over again. The Guardians hesitate to immediately battle him despite being attacked by him. It is just more logical for everyone to assume that he might be mind-controlled, because how could he possibly be evil after all the good deeds that he's done? This is also exactly how Mark responds later on when he sees his dad commit a demonstrably heinous act. It is just not something that he can believe despite the evidence of his own eyes. Mark sees Omni-Man not only through the lens of the hero of the world, but also through the personal lens of his father, his hero. And this is why I just can't believe that his dad would turn evil. Ultimately, Omni-Man is a soldier on a mission, and though his actions are horrific and show an utter disregard for human life or his son's feelings, if you look at the context of his background, these actions are pragmatically justifiable from his viewpoint. Some of the best sequences in the TV series are the training moments between Invincible and Omni-Man. Sometimes they do it in costume, but as often they are just Nolan and Mark, a father and a son playing together. And this is a good choice. It humanizes Omni-Man and also broadens our understanding of the character. It's usually in these moments that we are given a more honest glimpse of Nolan's worldview. To some extent, the 20 years of lies are at an end for Nolan, and with his plans for conquest of Earth now in motion, he's attempting to prepare Mark mentally and physically for what is to come. These are probably the most honest interactions that he's had with his son in 20 years. Mark for the first time is seeing more of his dad's stern, serious and warrior-like persona. For him, the excitement of finally getting powers is severely tempered by his fear that he simply won't measure up to the legacy of Omni-Man, or even to his own expectation. It is at the intersection of this that the relationship between father and son becomes a lot stronger once Mark has his powers. But at the same time, while Mark is completely honest in his dealings with his father, Omni-Man is still lying to Mark throughout each interaction. So while Mark is drawn closer to his dad through his true confessions, Omni-Man is unable to bridge the gap caused by the lies between them. Omni-Man has spent 20 years on the planet. He knows that 5% have their booties on the necks of the rest of the world population. How would this be any different if Viltrum were the rulers? The only difference in that scenario would be that Earth would gain access to the technology from 1,000 planets that are part of the Viltrum Empire. And though there are few Viltrumites in the universe, their sheer strength means that their victory is inevitable. And yet, it is in the nature of humanity to resist. And it is in the nature of Mark to believe that people deserve to have free will, that they should be allowed to govern themselves, and that they should not be forced to bend the knee to any oppressor or dictator. And so Mark will fight, and Mark will resist, because he's not just fighting for himself, he's fighting for a far greater goal. And just like his father, just like Omni-Man believes that what he's doing is for the greater good for the universe, that his cause is a cause worth fighting for, just like him, Mark believes that saving the planet is a cause worth dying for. And that's how you do great characters. You give them both goals, and you put those goals in opposition to one another. And then you see how it plays out. Invincible obviously only has a fraction of Omni-Man's powers, and is still learning how to use his powers or how to deal with the devastating toll of superhero battles in cities. But more than that, it is Invincible's compassion and humanity that makes him less effective in battle. In fact, it turns out in most battles that he's definitely not invincible. And yet, on the flip side, it is the strength of character that will make him Earth's greatest hero eventually. While Omni-Man and Invincible's relationship is pivotal to the story, this is not to imply that Mark's other parent character's development has been neglected. In fact, in the TV series, the characters improved much upon what she was shown as in the comic book. Deborah met Nolan 20 years ago when he saved a life, and she's the one person who treats him as an equal instead of as a god to be worshipped. The couple are shown to be in a happy, stable relationship with lots of love and respect and a deep understanding and trust between them. Too bad it's all a lie and part of Nolan's efforts to blend in. This is gaslighting at another level. Nolan is just a very, very good liar. Yet, despite claims that he might make later, Omni-Man is shown as actually having deep feelings for Deborah, whether he acknowledges it or not. Deborah is one of those rare, well-written, strong female characters who manages to push back against Nolan and challenge him without coming across as grating. She's not afraid to show her emotions either, or to express her fears, and we get a good understanding of the harsh realities of being married to somebody who might die in battle or be missing for extended time periods due to battles going wrong. Most people would freak out if they see interdimensional aliens kidnapping their loved ones. To her, it's Tuesday. Though Deborah is mostly acclimatized over time to how stressful and ridiculous her life is and deals with most situations with wit and resignation, one gets a sense that Mark now also being a superhero is a difficult thing for her to deal with. After all, this is her son. She's had 20 years of seeing Omni-Man in horrific battles, and on occasion has had to nurse him back from devastating injuries. This isn't something that she wants for her son. Despite her well-grounded fears of Mark being injured while saving people, she's also compassionate enough, though, for the plight of others to encourage him to do as his conscience demands. One gets a sense that this is the same way that she's dealt with Nolan over the years, thereby making him in turn someone who has a better understanding of humanity, or at least how to fool humanity. Deborah in the TV series has a lot more agency than was shown in the comic books. She's also smart and resourceful, as well as having a strong moral compass. So when suspicions mount against Omni-Man, she isn't blinded by her loyalty to him or the years that she spent with him, nor is she blinded by love to assume that she'd be safe from him if he found her snooping. She's also smart enough to know that if he is willing to do something as evil as get rid of all the Guardians of the Globe, then he will have no compunction to get rid of her as well. Robert Kirkman has always been good at characterization, and these characters established by him in the comics are improved on by the animation series. With a longer runtime, there is a possibility for them to improve on each character's arc significantly over what happened in the comic books. There's just too many characters in the show to dive into and to do them all justice, but we should quickly chat about Atom Eve, who along with Mark's best friend William becomes one of the core relationships in Invincible's life. Atom Eve is Eve Wilken, a fellow student in Mark's high school. They first meet in superhero garb while fighting off an alien invasion. As Atom Eve does not wear a mask, Mark immediately figures out her secret identity when he spots her at school the next day. In the timeline of the story, she's been a superhero for much longer than Mark, and she becomes a mentor of sorts for Invincible, and the two quickly form a strong bond as emergencies force them to team up on multiple occasions. Eve is an altruistic person, and much of her worldview is similar to Invincible's. The individual should sacrifice themselves for the greater good. Atom Eve is a hero that will fight the good fight, save people, and never give up, no matter the cost. She's also one of the most powerful members of the heroes in the team. Atom Eve's power is that she can manipulate the atomic structure of anything. She could literally turn any of the villains they face inside out or outright kill them. The fact that it is something that she would never even consider shows an incredible amount of restraint on her side. Another thing that the TV show does well is that we're shown a lot more of her relationship with her fellow team members and her family than what we were shown in the comic books. And it is these relationships that are the biggest source of strife in her life. Atom Eve's strong will, compassion, heroism, unwavering belief in helping people, these are all reasons why she is a strong female protagonist, much better than other depictions we've seen recently on screen.
Almost tasted that. Num, eat it up. Go play okay, 3, 2, 1. You know I'm the hottest.
Simply put, she's a person that would be heroic whether she had powers or not. Other than having superpowers, Mark is a more or less normal teenager boy, and in season 1 he started dating Amber, a girl at his school. There's an online narrative about how terrible Amber is and how manipulative she is as a girlfriend. But a fair watching of her actions dispels that notion. In actual fact, she bends over backwards to accommodate Mark and his ludicrous excuses. In season 1, Mark has a major problem trying to balance his personal life and being a superhero. This means a lot of the time he's letting Amber down. Sure, he was off doing superhero stuff, but there's only so much anyone would put up with. Despite the fact that Atom Eve initially discourages Mark from sharing his secret identity, it's also important to consider how long Mark is in a relationship with Amber. Now, it is stated in the show that this is a 6-month time period that they were dating, and throughout all their entire time, Mark kept on lying to her about his secret identity. So the thing is, unlike Nolan, Mark isn't good at lying, and Amber's also smart. So instead of being the nagging girlfriend narrative, which is what's being perpetuated online, a more accurate way of looking at it is that relationships need trust. And Mark is constantly violating this trust. Making the situation worse is that emergencies keep on popping up, and that means Invincible needs to deal with it, leading to Mark constantly disappointing Amber. In the light of this, just about anyone would lose their patience. This is not a relationship, this is one person lying to somebody else. There is of course a parallel in how much Mark is emulating his father. Nolan lies to everyone he knows, especially his loved ones, and Mark's relationship with Amber and William echoes this. For Nolan, lying is a necessary evil, and this is how he explains it to Mark as well. Choices need to be made, hard choices between what you want to do and what your responsibility is. So I disagree with the idea that Amber's a bad girlfriend. There's just really one bad scene where a character is assassinated. In the scene, she is made out to be an idiot, and this is grating because it takes her from being a smart, reasonable person into being an insecure, crazy, hot girl type. And the scene is very illogical in terms of how Amber's been presented up to that point. And I think this is a scene where most people got stuck, and why people hate her so much.
On this particular question, what I said proudly was, I don't give a fuck, Jimmy.
There's an alien called Alan in the show that attacks Earth on a regular basis. Every single time he gets defeated by Omni-Man. In the light of Omni-Man's ruthlessness, it is actually quite amazing that Alan the alien has survived their many fights over the years. Maybe Omni-Man just appreciates the workout. No matter what the reason, it's quite un-Voltrum-like to let Alan the alien survive at all. Alan is actually the perfect segue to talk about the excellent voice cast. Alan is a bit of a doofus and a goofball and is perfectly voiced by Seth Rogen. The character comes across as endearing, likable and humorous, as well as being just a little bit of a dumb jock. So this is typecasting at its best. Seth Rogen's voice makes me think of big, fluffy, lovable dogs for some reason, and that's kind of how Alan comes across. Omni-Man is voiced by the excellent J.K. Simmons, and I can hear the mustache in his every word. His voice is commanding, strong, forceful, and when needs be, super scary. J.K. gives Omni-Man's voice the needed gravitas, experience, command, and depth that one would expect from an assaulted warrior. Steve Ewan is perfect as Mark/Invincible. He sounds youthful, optimistic, and sincere throughout. Mark starts off being a young, inexperienced hero who is unsure of his abilities and whether he will live up to his legacy. At the same time, he's also just a 17-year-old boy navigating high school and his first romantic relationship, and Steve Ewan brings it all across flawlessly. I'm sure that as we get past the coming-of-age arc, and as Mark becomes older, the voice will reflect that maturity as well. It's not just the voice casting that's fantastic, the sound design also needs to be commended. Sounds of battle, sounds of impact come across viscerally within the show. And then there's little touches, like the static robotic speech of Robot, as well as the synthwave auto-tuned sounding voice of one of the villains, Machine Head. The whole composition of the music for the show is also pretty excellent. So all around, every single aspect of the show has been treated with care and love. The show might be called Invincible and mostly focus on Mark and his family, but there are a lot of subplots that make the world seem more lived in and more believable. Two of the villains, the Mauler twins, have their own mission. Robot, the leader of the teen team, engages in his own machinations to manipulate his teammates, and the Global Defense Agency also schemes behind the scenes. There's a lot going on in this show. Smaller and sub-characters from the comic books also add to the subplots, making the world more complex and engaging. For instance, Deborah is set off on a suspicious path by occult investigator and demon Damien Darkblood, who is a kind of a hybrid of the demon Etrigan from DC Comics and the Watchman vigilante Rorschach. On the surface, the plot and the artwork might appear to be simplistic, but each event and character is intricately woven together to form a very complex and ambitious narrative. As the story progresses, alliances will constantly shift and adjust, and characters will change and go through character arcs and development. Or they'll die, but ultimately it is all in service to the storytelling and not in service to keeping the characters around forever and milking them to death. You'll hear a lot of people talk about superhero fatigue as an explanation why Marvel and DC have eroded any sense of trust or goodwill with the fans, and why no one is looking forward to the next phase of the boring paint-by-numbers content churned out by those two studios. It's not that we're fatigued of superheroes, it's the bland cookie-cutter predictable garbage, bad storytelling and uninspiring characters that we're tired of. Shows like The Boys, Invincible, Moving and Gen V prove that good story and good characters beat the living crap out of big budgets. So Marvel and DC, get your shit together.
Because if I have to come back here, it's gonna get fucking ugly.
The problem with DC and Marvel is that there's just no experimentation and innovation. They're telling the same stories they did 10 years ago, just worse, with shittier characters and no respect for characters who have paid their dues. It's like they're ashamed of the source material.
I'm gonna go your mom.
The great thing about Invincible is that the story has a definite end in mind that was planned from the start, and characters grow and develop as the story continues. And throughout it all, the bonds of love, family and friendship is continuously explored against the backdrop of ever-increasing stakes for the world and more elaborately violent action sequences. Now, we've seen in the past that other adaptations tend to fail if the story has no definite ending in sight and the showrunners need to make up their own shit. In this case, that won't happen. As long as the animation series stays true to the original comic book, we should be getting a great series with a perfect end in sight. The animation series has already shown a huge respect for the source material, as well as the ability to improve on a lot of aspects of the story as part of the adaptation. So I highly recommend that you watch the show, get the comics and strap in for a great ride. You won't be disappointed. Allow me to throw a quick rating at you. The show is definitely better than anything that you're seeing on the screen right now. And it's almost as good as the other thing that you're seeing on the screen right now. Okay, so I guess if I haven't made my point by now, I never will. Thanks for being here and thanks for listening to me ramble on for so long, but I really love the show and I hope that people will give it a chance and actually check it out. If you decide to watch it after listening to all of this, then let me know what you thought. Season 2 has just started and I'm pretty excited to see how it all pans out in this season.
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.